2019, I made a very specific prediction about what was going to happen with advertising in our industry, right? I said that at the time, the financial services world, which was spending, I think, roughly around $17 billion on digital marketing, but spent $42 billion total, was going to move an increasing amount of ad spend into digital. And that would dramatically change kind of our customer acquisition landscape. Fast forward to today, in what is it, October 2022, it looks like the industry is going to close the year. The financial services industry is going to close the year pushing between 27 and 28 billion dollars on digital ad spend. That's a $10 billion increase in ad spend since I made that prediction 3 years ago. So $10 billion has come into various investor channels and finance advertising channels in 36 months, right? The change is so big that financial services is now the largest industry by advertiser in the world, online, anywhere. There is no industry, even consumer spending doesn't spend as much now as financial services. That's a crazy idea, that financial services is the biggest spender, and our click costs across financial services is higher by far than anyone else in any other industry. And the click to conversion rates, if you look at the research, are actually some of the lowest. Like, other industries might have 5.5% click to conversion rates, and like financial services broadly has like 1.3 to 1.7 or something. It's really low because there's way more spend, there's way more competition, and this is going to increase a lot, right? Because financial services is moving in mass as an industry towards a digital and fintech environment, and fintech as an industry is already pushing something like a $26 trillion industry size. And because they're digital, right? They're fintechs, digital media and digital ads are kind of a standard part of doing business. And if you look at this from like a traditional advertising standpoint, your average scaled company in a non-digital environment would like kind of in a consumer industry would spend something like 7 to 8% of the revenue on advertising. If you pretended that fintechs could do it for less, which would be like spend 5%, and you're looking at something that gets to be a $26 trillion industry, you're talking about spend ballooning to like $66 billion at 5% of that industry size, right? But like the reality is the industry itself, like the financial services industry, the digital side of it is continuing to grow and transform. And so if you're right, the reason I'm saying this, the reason I'm pointing this out is not just because of what the impacts that it has on publishers and trader educators. It's kind of more broadly that if you're an entrepreneur or marketer in financial, in any part of financial, including these trader education and FinPub, like you can't ignore how big of an opportunity financial media spend and the growth of financial media spend is right now. Because like the truth is like a digital company is going to spend more of their revenue on advertising than non-digital companies. And like we've seen this, like big companies that have like during their growth phases have spent as much as 50,000 or 50% of their revenue on ads, right? So they'll spend way more than that 5% or 7%. And so the total number of dollars that's going to flood into all aspects of digital marketing, which includes advertising, but also digital content production, like social, everything is going to be like one of the biggest like money flows out there on the internet for the next 5 to 7 years, I think. Like if you look at what the fintech world itself has raised in the last 5 years, it's something like $224 billion, which is, a huge amount of money, and a huge amount of that, because these are startups, and is going to be going to digital advertising and media. That spend, it's already dwarfing by far. Like there's no comparison between the money that's spent in fintech, the money that's spent in more broad financial services niches in consumer finance than what FinPub spends as a whole. I mean, we've basically seen like in the last 36 months, $10 billion come in. And like to put that into perspective from a FinPub world, like imagine if Agora at its height when it was doing like $1.2 million, $1.3 million had taken 100% of its revenue, and they didn't pay payroll, didn't pay rent, didn't pay for taxes, nothing. They just took all of it and put it into digital advertising, and then realize that we've had so much money that it'd be like 10 Agoras doing that at once in a 36-month period. Like that's the increase year over year that's been happening in terms of digital financial advertising spend, and that is continuing. It's growing. It's going to get bigger, right? And so kind of like this is going to be a tailwind that's going to help anybody who sells media, and it's going to be a headwind that continues to kind of like hamper and harm people who are buying media. You're going to have to be a more effective media buyer. You're going to have higher LTVs. Like this is a structural kind of change in the way that digital advertising works. And you throw this on top of all the other things that are happening in digital advertising, from like, you know, the Apple Facebook war that's lowering transparency and making targeting harder, to like just all the different things that are happening there, which is a big conversation to have. And you realize that like this is a one of the most important things that's happening for anybody who is a marketer or an entrepreneur in financial and FinPub or any other part of financial, right? And so like from a kind of a bottom line thing here, the reason I want to talk about this real quick is like, if you're a marketer or entrepreneur right now working in this space, like you need to realize a couple of things. One is that selling media is going to be one of the growing hotspots for all you over the next 5 to 7 years. Like selling media in the space, but selling media outside the space is going to continue to be one of the hottest spots anywhere, because there's just so much money flooding in there, right? So it's kind of like a picks and shovels play, right? Like it's a gold rush. It's going to be a gold rush here for a little while, even though we've had like this dip in ad spend during like hard times. Like whenever the things get good, you're going to see the money is going to flow first and largest through these financial services sectors. So that, I mean, that doesn't mean you should abandon FinPub clients. Like there's going to be actually a multiplier effect for those of you who stay plugged into FinPub. Like that kind of deserves its own conversation, which I'm going to do. I'm basically going to be doing a video series here on what I think of these major kind of transformations that are happening, but trying to bring it down into this practical thing that you can do, right? You should be selling media in some form or another. Like it should become a part, whether it's through a partner, like we have like all these great ad networks in our industry that can kind of take that off of your hands, so you can still operate your business, but you can get that kind of advantage of advertising revenue. I think that if you have an ad network, then moving towards like opportunities outside of just the newsletter trader education space is kind of a must do at this point. I think that there's a lot of specific subsectors that are going to be really interesting to work with, right? Obviously, like SaaS, you know, fintech companies, there's a ton of money there, and a lot of that money that gets raised goes towards marketing, right? It's audience building. The two things they spend money on are building their teams and building their audience. And so the other one is like wealth management, which is another thing that you don't really think too much about maybe from our space, but wealth management is a financial industry that's been in transformation as well. And all of those functions that I've been talking about for the last couple of years, about how business development functions and marketing functions they're all going online. They're all going to media models. They're all going to advertising models. And I looked at some of the numbers, and like a top, like there's the average wealth managers, that there's a range of spend, right? That whatever the revenue is between 1% and 4% usually of revenue. And the top producers, the elite people, spend about 4%, right? They spend more money on advertising, which is not a shocker, right? Like in most industries, the people who are kind of the best producers in that industry advertise more. And so that means, like, you know, you got a guy making $1 million a month, he's spending 40K on advertising per year, which from a media seller's perspective doesn't seem that great until you realize that there's tons of guys who are in the billions, multiple billions, and they're relatively small on a scale basis of the size of their business. They have a few billion under management, and they're spending a lot of money then annually on advertising media. So that's another area that's really interesting. The investors relations space we've talked about a lot in the past. A lot of you guys know about it to some degree. I think that is another industry that's in transformation. It's another aspect of this where there's going to be more spend. Like right now, there's a ton of spend, and a lot of you guys who sell media are doing really well working with the current investor relations world. I think that world is actually going to completely transform and grow dramatically. That's going to need a much bigger conversation to have, but That's another sector where selling media is going to be good, both on the public and private side. We're seeing this in fund managers and asset managers too, right? Like they're starting to spend more, and they're going to need to spend more, not just on advertising directly, but actually building media assets. Banks and consumer spending, right? Loans and credit cards are, of course, like a huge, huge chunk of spending. And so it's not directly competitive with the things that we have here. But the thing that's most interesting to me about this is that the value of your audience, which we've talked about some, but I really want to nail this down. I'm going to do another video here real quick that talks about this. Is that there's this concept that I have of fractionalized acquisition, and how you as publishers and as media companies can actually build a lot of additive revenue. You can add multiple revenue streams from the same existing audience.